People, it's happening. SuperFly 2.0 will not be naked very much longer. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode from Ampro Engineering, and today SuperFly gets pants. In case you've missed some of the previous episodes, this is SuperFly 2.0. I have disassembled the car slightly. I took off the upper control link that I would normally use for my double wishbone front suspension because the roll cage and body that we are going to install already has that. I want to be very clear. What I'm about to do here is not necessary if you have or want to build a one of these SuperFlies with the cantilever front suspension and the double wishbone rear suspension. You do not need to install the roll cage I'm about to show, nor do you need the body that I'm about to show. The reason is the standard Hornet body does actually fit. You will need the control pivot that comes with the front suspension, and if you want to chop the wing off and use the wing mount from Ampro Engineering, then you don't need the wing. If you do want to run a completely stock body, stock wing, I do sell this rear piece here, which is necessary for the double wishbone rear suspension, as well as the lower shock mount, which we'll show you back on SuperFly 1.0. I do have this without the wing posts. It does have these body mounts, and the car will accept a standard body. It's pretty darn close right here, so if you don't want to scratch the back of your body, I put a little bit of tape on the inside to prevent that, because this comes within fractions of a millimeter. So that is definitely an option if you do want to run your stock body. I'm not going to go down that path, and this is why. The Hornet chassis is remarkably weak, especially in these areas up here, which are patched because they're broken. And we talked about this earlier on, but I will reiterate it. This chassis was intended to have the hard body of the Grasshopper, and that in turn acted like a unibody. So the stresses in the front of the car would be dispersed through the Grasshopper's ABS body. Well, the Hornet is polycarbonate, so the chassis takes up all of the stress. On SuperFly 1.0, this chassis was actually in worse shape. It was split straight across there, and the shock tower was cracked here, here, and here. That was about 4 years ago, and SuperFly has been heavily used and abused since then, and the chassis shows no signs of weakening, and the reason is the cage. Now, SuperFly 1.0 has the original SuperFly 1.0 body, so this body is available. There are three main pieces that are unique to this car: the front hood area, the right side panel, and the left side panel. This roof piece here is the same for SuperFly 1.0 and 2.0. Now, as you can see here, this is, and I'll show you on the other car as well, but just kind of an idea. This cage, which is unique to SuperFly 1.0 in that I don't no longer offer it for another reason, has reinforced the entire front end and allowed the load of an impact to be distributed through the entire chassis and not force the chassis to bend right here. The reason why this roll cage here is not available is because this fifth shock modification here is redundant. I now have the transmission brace that goes down here, which is also the battery door retainer, and this particular setup is simply overkill, adds more weight to the vehicle, and is simply not useful now that I have a much simpler and more elegant means of restraining the rear suspension. If you do want to, in fact, install the roll cage, you do have a couple of options, and let me show you those. I will begin with option 1. This is the SuperFly 1.0 and 2.0 roll cage. Again, this will require the body set for 1.0 or 2.0. 2.0 you haven't seen yet. It may be in some renderings, but I'll show you the actual panels now. And this will not in any way fit the stock Hornet body. This is required to have the additional body panels that I have designed, and may push it beyond the budget since these parts are definitely not inexpensive. They are very large. This one here is made out of SLS nylon. In fact, that is the only option I offer for these parts. In particular, they only come in white or black, and that has to do with the ability that Shapeways has to dye their parts. This has been painted with an automotive outdoor enamel paint, just something I bought at the auto parts store. It is gloss, which if I can show it to you here how this is. This is not a polished version of this roll cage, and this is about the texture that you can expect. I really don't care that there is texture here because this is going to go on a car that is going to be driven. So as far as I'm concerned, it looks great. I have added more layers on SLS parts in the past, and eventually the paint does fill in all the little gaps, all the little surface imperfections, and it does require a bit of a color sanding. However, for this case, this is perfect. Now, option 1 is this one here. Option 2 is this one here. This roll, if you can maybe see it in profile, it's hard to tell. You can kind of see it here. It's exaggerated because of the angle, but the blue roll cage is designed to fit under the stock Hornet body. And as I mentioned earlier, and I wanted to stress this setup requires the rear upper shock mount, whether you do or don't want the wing mount. It does integrate into there and allows the impact on the rear suspension to be transmitted through the entire chassis as well, and not just put all the load on the rear, I guess, shock towers. You can call those shock cantilever arms. I'm going to focus on this one in this episode here. I will talk about this later, but you can see some simple differences here. Like, for example, there are no mounts anywhere for the additional body panels. This here has these two posts here that protrude for the headlights, and some other differences here and there. You can see there's a bit of a new support rib here at the back. And for both of these versions here, you can mount the driver to the cage to eliminate having to deal with the driver and maybe getting caught in here, so that can be attached to the cage. In comparison to the original, so this one here is unpainted. Again, I did paint this blue. This is unpainted in black, and you can see some differences, like, for example, this is the 5th shock mounting area. And really, I mean, there's a lot of geometry changes to go from this to this, especially in terms of a lot of differences here in the front. In fact, SuperFly 1.0, this whole thing is missing. So I did a lot of stuff to reinforce this cage. We are going to use this one, and later on, we are going to use the blue one. So let's move on. Now, I do want to mention that this is a very easy installation. The hard part we did before, when we were installing all the rear suspension and the front suspension, we had to drill holes and all that. For this, it's really going to be anticlimactic. There's really not that much here. The first thing I want to do is install these ball studs right here in these little holes right there. This is going to be our new upper pivot point for the front suspension. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So the ball studs have been installed, and please note, it's very important to use nuts on the back. These are not designed to be threaded into. And while I was there, I went ahead and put on some eyeballs because, come on, they're cool. This is ready to actually go on at this point. I also don't have a driver. I'm sorry. I actually am just completely out of them and will be whipping some up soon. Now, this next bit here, you have to make sure the Nerf bar is off, because the screw that holds the Nerf bar in also holds this in. So you'll put this in, put the screw through the Nerf bar from the inside, and then screw it in place. So you're probably going to want a fairly long screwdriver for this. At this point here, I'm going to move this wire out of the way. The only tricky bit is installing the back half over here. I do want to mention that all of the rear wing mounts I've ever made are identical, but a while back I did change some geometry. So this little stud right here and the hole that will soon thread into for the roll cage were reversed. So if you have an older one and the indent for the hole and the post for the alignment are reversed, cut the post off, drill it out, and then using a smaller, like a 2.5 millimeter drill bit, and then you can just ignore that dowel, or you can drill that area out and put a little dowel pin. But I feel that very, very few of you out there have one that old. Okay, so we're just going to align this in here, and that pegs in place. It uses the mechanical speed control mounting area as well, for a couple reasons. A, it is just another good solid mounting point. B, some of you out there may know my intense hatred for mechanical speed controls and believe that nobody should have a mechanical speed control, but that is for another episode. It is in. That's it. Now let's put some screws in. I am prepared for the installation, and what I wanted to mention is I've really been fighting this chassis, or this cage I should say, for the past few years. It seems that regardless of what Hornet chassis I'm trying to install it on, something doesn't line up. And after doing a considerable amount of research and measuring and all that, it seems that depending on the age of the vehicle, the condition of the vehicle, whether it's original or re-release, there's some warping to the chassis. So what I have done is basically taken an average of where the holes are and simply made them fit as best I can. So you can see here in the front, these holes are slightly oblonged. They were off by about 0.5 millimeter, but when I tried them on another chassis that I have, they were spot on. You know, just take it with a grain of salt. This is done to the best of my ability to get it to fit all the Hornets. And so just note that you may need to do a little bit of tweaking to get it in. I'm gonna go ahead and just fit this now. Most of these, now I'm using some shorter, these are I believe 8 millimeter M3 screws, self-tapping. Typically, you think most of you have seen that I don't like using these smaller screws because they're usually harder to find on some of these kits. Here, you're a little bit out of luck because I really couldn't do much over here to make these a little bit taller. You can use longer ones. They're going to punch out the backside of the chassis. They might make a little dent or something, so you might need to actually make a hole back there. So if you do have the standard, these guys over here, longer 12 millimeter ones, which will fit in most of the car, just note that you may have to just do a little bit of work to get that out of there. Okay, so that is in. You can see the servo horn is quite close, but does fit. And the servo can be removed with the cage in place. Otherwise, that would suck. Let's install the rear ones here. So that's another 12 millimeter. Okay. Slot that in place. And, you know, these are nylon into, or sorry, so we're threading directly into this old ABS, and this is an original chassis, so I don't want to overstress it. None of the holes in this car are stripped. They're all in quite good shape. So I highly recommend that when you are installing these, you back thread first to make sure the screw falls into the original hole, or the threads. If you are upgrading your Hornet, which is what this chassis was, many of these holes simply aren't threaded yet. If you have a grasshopper or you don't know where the heck it came from, just make sure you back thread first so that the threads fall into place, and do not over torque ABS. The minute it comes to a nice snug stop, that is it. All right, I've put in basically the 4 important ones here that will hold the chassis, the cage in place, excuse me. For the rear, I will do the same thing here. I'll get another couple of the longer screws. And next, so I'll do this off camera. I will now prepare these screws back here as well as the Nerf bars. I'll be right back. A couple things worth mentioning when installing this. I used to have a screwdriver that would allow me to punch it straight through the entire car, and that's in the garage and I don't want to go in there. So I'm also using this Tamiya screwdriver, very important. When installing this, the walls on this piece are kind of thin, simply because of the geometry. So I like to, because it does get a little bit stiff, and I like to go in a little bit and then kind of back and forth a little. And what this does is it cuts the threads in nice and deep. So it's not going to leave the nylon under tension, and it really allows this to seat itself very nicely. Okay, remember that you always want to make sure that you have properly cleaned this out using a drill. When installing this, you want to drill this out to a 2.5 millimeter as usual. If you didn't do that before, I hope you did that before. Otherwise, oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, let us move on to the Nerf bars. I have the bottom of the Nerf bar in the front installed already. At the rear, we have to attach it to the, in this case, the Omega rear suspension. Although this is happening on SuperFly 2.0, the installation of the entire cage is going to be the same regardless if you have a stock Hornet with a cage and just the rear suspension brace, or a full-on SuperFly 2.0. This is all about the same. In the event of a stock Hornet, you would install this with the stock sliding transmission piece. Let's put a screw in here. Sorry. Okay, again, you do want to make sure that this has been drilled out. I did this when I was preparing the suspension pieces for the installation. Okay. All right, the next thing we're going to do is the upper mount for the Nerf bar here. Now this requires a lot of obscenities to be used. This is technical, very technical. So what happens is you push this in, and if it goes through the first time, I will be amazed. And I am suddenly amazed. When installing this on SuperFly 1.0, there was considerable word usage that is not intended for younger audiences. And it looks like my experience is serving me well, as this seems to want to go in the first time. That is mind-boggling. Okay. All right, there it is. It's in. I'll do it to the other side now. I'm pretty blown away. I want to mount the front upper links now. As I always show in the other videos, it's very important that you just don't push down on it, because you don't want it to flex this piece here, which is about 1 millimeter, maybe I think it's 2 millimeters. Nevertheless, although this stuff is fairly flexible and durable, you simply don't want to break it. So I'm going to try and get my pliers, if you can see this on camera, around the back. Bottom part of the pliers is on the nut. I'll press down and very easily pop that in place. Next, I will flip this over and use the mechanical speed control mounts right here to install these 3 posts. So we'll flip this over, remove ye old battery door. There are a few things to make note of here. You do want to make sure that these holes are clean. Unfortunately, because of just the geometry over here, not very long of a screw can fit. There's only about 3 to 4 millimeters of space here. So you'll probably have to use one of the smaller 3 millimeter long screws, or cut one down from 12 to probably around 6 millimeters, and this will fit. Do not force anything here, because you don't want to crack this mount. Same with this here. This one's actually a through hole. See through that there. So this one here, just be careful and do that back and forth with the screwdriver to cut the threads very nicely in there. It's a little bit hard to see, but these screws here, the outer ones have been cut down to just about 5 millimeters. I'll try and wedge it in there. And I'm keeping everything loose because I want to make sure that all 3 will in fact go in. If you can see that there. Do that same back and forth again. You really want to make sure you're cutting the nylon. Okay, when it stops, it stops. Finally, we have this mount here. Now this one I've had by far the most trouble with. This post here, depending on a variety of things, can be off as far as 2 millimeters, plus or minus, inboard or outboard. It's a complete pain in the butt. So if yours is lined up okay, fantastic. You should be consider yourself very, very lucky. This one's off by about 3/4 of a millimeter. So I'm going to put a screw in there. On top of that, this post is a little bit in the way. So there's a lot of things going against you here. So I'm going to try and push this post until I think it's there. It goes. It just popped in. It goes back threading it and thread it straight on in there. Perfect, and it's installed. The roll cage is on, so thank you for watching. Tune in 2 months when I put the body on, and I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. How many of you are going to start yelling at the screen right now? Of course, I'm going to put the body on right now, so let me get those pieces and move on. If you intend on building a SuperFly 2.0 body, these are the panels that you can purchase. However, if you'd like to save a few bucks, this rear panel is completely unnecessary. This thing here can be replaced very easily with a piece of aluminum. So really, you only need these 3 parts. In fact, SuperFly 1.0 has 1, 2, 3 pieces and that same roof. Now these are different. They look a little bit similar, but you can see there's these are a little bit more soft and curvaceous. These are significantly more jagged. So they are different pieces. These are also much smaller. So SuperFly 1.0's body is cheaper than 2.0's body. Let's begin by installing the hood. No screws are required here. However, due to the geometry that I created, I wanted to kind of pull this up a little bit. You can see the front body mount is not flush. So I'm going to fix that by putting a few washers underneath the back of it to pull it up. And I knew this was going to happen, but again, this was a cosmetic move. I inserted 4 washers behind the body post. They happen to be 0.5 millimeter in thickness each, which means I pushed it up by 2 millimeters, but maybe some trial and error is necessary for you. Let's pull this back off, knowing that that's going to fit. We will install the side panels. Now for this, I am going to use some shorter M3 self-tapping screws. This was kind of an accident, but worked out beautifully. We need to mount the front panel to that screw right there. Notice the cantilever setup. Well, if you look at it a little bit more, boom, it's right there. I wish I could say that I had intended to do that, but I'm sorry, blind luck. So we will set that in this particular orientation. I apologize. You probably can't see it very well. Now I'm going to try and wedge a driver in here. I did steal this driver out of my wife's car because it is gold and kind of like a metallic-y, magenta-y color. It was basically the result of many other colors kind of sandwiched together. And plus my wife wondered why I have a boy driving her car. So good point. Let's get him out of there and stuff him in here. This was always kind of a weird complaint about SuperFly, was that I didn't have a driver. I had a shock. All right, now we have a driver. There, are you happy? Side panels are installed. Let's put the top panel on now. I am using 12mm long self-tapping M3s simply because they're easy to find. Probably don't need them at all to be this long. Roof's installed, so little man, roof, both left and right panel. I'm gonna put the hood back on the car. We'll get some cotter pins. You're probably thinking to yourself, are you crazy, man? It's gonna take me 45 minutes to pull the body off of SuperFly. Well, yeah, probably right. However, I will tell you this. In the amount of time that I've owned and run SuperFly 1.0, I have never had the side panels or the roof off. The front end comes off all the time, but just in terms of general maintenance, it's never had to be completely stripped down, and that roll cage has never come off either. So, I mean, that's a big plus. All right, so front on, side panels on, roof is on. And I want you all to know that you are experiencing this with me together. I've never seen this whole car complete. So the body is complete, and what we're gonna do now is install the back half of this. This is kind of a big moment for me, as I have never seen SuperFly 2.0 complete other than in CAD. And in fact, what I've also done is turned on Instagram, so there are some folks watching this momentous occasion live. So if this panel doesn't fit properly, you folks on YouTube, but more importantly, the folks on Instagram, will get the unedited version of me shouting many, many, many obscenities. Let's install this. Here's how this works. We saw that for the front of SuperFly 2, there's 3 body mounts. For the sides, there's a screw here, here, and there, and the sides are designed not to come off, same with the roof. Once they're on, you just have this front panel. The rear is kind of a big chunk. It is, in fact, this giant piece here. I really went back and forth on how to do this, but here is how this is going to be installed. Instead of dealing with 50 different screws and body pins like I originally thought, I plan on running this car with the body, but as durable as the front half of this car is, because of all of the overhang at the rear, my thought was, how about I make it so that when SuperFly is kind of driven by itself and sitting on a shelf and looking pretty, it's all put together. But when I go to the track, I just take this piece, take it off, and take it on the track. So that is what has happened. To do that, we have some very weird things as part of this body. This rear panel, when purchased, will come with this little dangly. Okay, we're gonna break this off. And dangly, by the way, is an industry term. I don't know if you know this. In the engineering world, you have things called danglies. Okay, you take that off, and that's just there to hold it in place. Otherwise, you'd have to buy a whole bunch of different pieces, and that's irritating. You take that and put it right there in the front. You'll have 2 of these. We'll set one there and one here. These are alignment pegs, and they line up into, there's a little barrel right in there that this aligns into. So let's attempt that. Again, this is a first for me. So we are going to take this panel here, and it has some features underneath, these circles or these holes that will go through the body post, and then these features which align the body post and actually sit directly on the outer little bosses here. And then these 2 will kind of tab in. So I'm going to put it in at an angle. And just a heads up, I don't expect this gap to be tight. I designed it with about 0.5 millimeter of space, just about like this, because there's a lot of deviation in the print process. Actually, that's probably the tightest thing. The deviation is going to be in the chassis. just the way that the ABS is. So I didn't want to make it too perfectly tight. Okay, so it'll line up pretty nicely, kind of slot in there, and yeah. There's SuperFly's rear panel. I think that is spot on there. I was looking at this here, and I'm like, this gap is really too big. The problem is that that post that I have in there is loose. You have to glue it in place, otherwise it's just kind of moving around. It should be right about there. It looks like there's no gap here, but it's because you're not looking at it at the right angle. There's also a gap. And again, this just has to do with tolerances. It's about 0.5 millimeter all the way around. Maybe closer to, it's about 0.5 millimeter. So there we have it. So when you get ready to go race, you're ready to rumble. The wing that I installed is just going to be some cheap wing. I think you've all seen this installation here where I put the wing mount in. I do have a 3D printed wing here, which I love. This used to be on my work Hornet. You can see what has happened to said work Hornet. It has ripped off the wing mount, and a terrible, terrible dog bit the car and took a chunk out of the wing, if you can see that right there. If you have or want this wing you can see here, it's been rolled many, many times. It's really, really strong. However, this wing can only be used with the stock Hornet body. If you want to mount this wing on this body, this wing mount, I have a version for this wing, but your first rollover will either destroy this or destroy this. These two are both very rigid, and something is gonna give. Do not install this unless it's on a stock Hornet body or with this mount here for display purposes only. So very, very important. That's why it's not gonna go on this car. We are not done yet. We are not done yet. Why? Because you haven't seen the back of the body yet. We have taillights. These are the lenses here. Some flush cutters right there to snap them off. These go in from the rear. Now there's a little boss right there, and that will slot itself like so. To hold it in place, you're going to use a M3 set screw, and that is it. So put one there. Something important to note, there is a detent on the taillight for that M3 screw. So it's not on this side, it is only on the one side. So make sure that when you put the M3 in, it's on that face there. So we'll aim the detent downward, grab ourselves an M3 screw, and honestly, it can be glued as well. It's a little too tight there. Okay, and right, done. That is it. It's held in place. It's not going to go anywhere. And again, if you want to put a little dab of glue there, you can do that. That is not it. What is this notch? Well, that notch is completely pointless, I know. Completely pointless. That notch is for exhaust tips. I know, utterly pointless. But exhaust tips. That's really the only answer that I have for anybody. This screw here is an 8 millimeter long self-tapping M3. Let's put it back on the car. Nice. Well, that is the first time I'm seeing all this stuff installed. That looks cool. That looks slick. Shocks are just nicely tucked up under there. You can see it's not the roomiest, but everything does fit in there. Oh, that's awesome. I'm very, very excited about that. I wish I had a wing to put on it. I don't. Even SuperFly is a little bit different, so it won't fit. We're doing good. I'm very, very happy about this. Hope everybody enjoyed this. I mean, I know this has been kind of like the never-ending story here, but I hope it's going to be worth it. Very, very soon when this car goes to the track, I think it'll be pretty darn awesome. I've got to put my rims on. This is the front wheel all painted up, and as you can see, the corresponding rear wheel all painted up. So that's going to be very, very nice. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy this. I've been sitting on this for quite a while and just had to get it done. So glad I finally got that all squared away, and I know a number of people were watching this live on Instagram. I hope it wasn't too too boring, and that goes right back at you, all those folks watching on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this. Before you take off, please check out the band Blue Pinto. They are the ones that allow me to use all the music that you hear on my channel. A link to their page can be found in the end credits. And if you liked this ridiculous build, please add me on Facebook and Instagram at Ampro Engineering on both. And before you take off, there's a little bit of driving video of this car, really rudimentary stuff just done in the front of the house, just to kind of do some testing. Hope you enjoyed that. It's nothing much, but it should be a little bit of fun to watch. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.